Does anyone else still remember the very first day you fought Jen Moran in Monster Hunter Tri? I think it changed how I would perceive games for the rest of my life. I'm pretty sure I sat down in front of my TV with my Wii, booted up the game for like the 5th school night in a row, and started on my next mission. But what surprised me is I was placed on a boat pulling up beside the largest boss I have ever fought in a video game. The thing about this battle is it exemplifies not only the reason Monster Hunter was an amazing game, but the single reason many AAAs in the past decade have actually failed so spectacularly. Ultimately, what is a video game if not a gigantic power fantasy of some kind? Ultimately, you want to feel like you're inhabiting this world you've never seen before, but you also want to feel like the hero that is on this journey. You want to feel like you could actually be doing this thing you can't do in real life. Monster Hunter does this extremely well by adding relatable elements to the game. Monsters attack each other, eat smaller prey, and other wildlife migrates and interacts with each other in interesting and unique ways. But then Jen Moran completes this entire endeavor of making the game feel fun, not only because it's exciting, but because it simply just makes sense. The moment you step on the boat, you feel so tiny. You've been fighting monsters 10 times your size up until this point, but in real life, our largest mammal, the whale, is 100 times larger than even that. When you think of dragons in medieval times, you think of something that can melt a castle in 2 seconds. You don't think of the pipsqueak called Alduin in Skyrim. But the best part is, despite the ability to use your weapons, they feel useless against this thing. I mean, it's like the equivalent of trying to kill someone with a toothbrush. I'm sure it's possible, but it's not exactly practical. But the developers have built this world with careful thought, the same way they did in the Witcher series, The Last of Us, Star Wars, and even Pokemon to a great extent. They built an entire world long before they put characters and gameplay into it, and it truly transported you into their lives. This ship is armed with all sorts of specialized weapons to take down this behemoth. No fancy plot devices or special power boosts to explain any of it. Jump onto a cannon and start shooting the crap out of this thing. If you don't do enough damage, then you lose. Simple as that. And don't even get me started on the second phase of the fight where it's coming right towards you. And although it appears slow at first, once you're up close to that thing, it's moving at an insane pace. At the start of the video, I stated how recent AAA titles have failed, and Jen Moran exemplifies success, right? Well, one way I can explain it is invisible barrier. Let's compare Starfield and No Man's Sky for a minute. In No Man's Sky, the amount of freedom you have is crazy. You can fly up to a ship, board it, and steal it by hacking into their system. You can destroy specific components and even call in your own fleet to help in battles on a grand scale. This is the power fantasy of a space sim. Not only can you find and fight off pirates, but by enabling so much nuance to the combat and the different ways you play the game, you enable the creativity and freedom that makes you feel like you had input into the game and its decisions. You feel like you actually used your mental capacity to take down the challenge. In Starfield, somehow they missed the memo. Now, sure, this game is great and you can view it as more of a story-driven space sci-fi flight sim or whatever, I don't know. But let's say you are watching Star Wars and Anakin and Obi-Wan flying down at Grievous' ship in Attack of the Clones, and instead of flying through the rain shield and onto the ship, you hit the side and explode.
The General's command ship is dead ahead. Oh, I have a bad feeling about this.
That's what Starfield feels like in comparison to No Man's Sky. In Starfield, even if you can find a large enemy that is overwhelming you on a planet, you can't just board your vessel and shoot at it from above, like you've seen done 500 times in any single space opera or sci-fi film. But it's what players want to do. They want to leave the obvious power fantasy. Another example here is Skull and Bones, where they didn't even have hand-based combat, and you couldn't find anything interesting on the islands you landed at. 50% of a pirate high seas fantasy is searching for treasure and using your brain to solve riddles and uncover mysteries that lead to bounties of treasure left there by pirates that came before you. Now, sure, it's easy for me to say all this without having developed a game of my own before. Adding all these features is undeniably difficult and would extend the development times of many of these games. But when you decide on a specific power fantasy to develop, You can't just cut corners. It needs to be as authentic as possible, otherwise you just simply need to choose a different game or genre. No Man's Sky started with a limited feature set, but they designed it in such a way that adding all of these components to fulfill the premise was easy with enough time. In the same way that Jhen Mohran makes you feel like you are fighting a genuinely insurmountable foe, in a world overrun with monsters of all kinds, Skyrim lets you kill any character permanently. Assassin's Creed makes you feel more acrobatic than Olympian champions, and For Honor makes you feel genuinely like a medieval knight. People want to not only feel like they are part of a story and make it their own, but they want to feel rewarded for their intelligence. Luke Skywalker defeated Emperor Palpatine through a series of carefully curated decisions, and Geralt of Rivia had to assess his opponent's strengths and weaknesses before taking them on. Players want the freedom to make their own choices, but they also want to feel like the world is real and makes sense. I hope you learned something today from this video. Please like and subscribe the video if you enjoyed it, and see here why Monster Hunter Wilds is going to reinvigorate this passion for gaming for many around the world.